What do you think, Katie, about how should pastors, and I want to get into your advice to parents too, because we were talking before the show and you had some really incredible things to say about parents responding to children who have gender dysphoria or identify as transgender. What's your message to, let's start with the church, that message you gave to the pastors about how they should respond?
Pastors should always, I like how my pastor responded. You should always respond initially with prayer, because how could you go wrong? You want to open your conversations by praying and just recalling on God's promises and letting the other person hear that those promises are for them. It's not just these promises that are kind of floating around and maybe some people get them, maybe some people don't. Like, it is for you. And when Christ gives you his name in your baptism, that promise is for you. And so that's exactly how I've seen pastors go about it. And I know certain denominations, there are differences with baptism, but that's always something that people can point to. And I think that's really important. The other thing that my pastor did was, in my head, I was ranking my sin as the absolute worst sin that a person could ever commit. And he had to compare it to things that are sins, but that I would have seen as not so bad. You can get away with that. I can't get away with this. I'm too bad to be forgiven, but you're not so bad. He compared it to other sexual sins. He compared it to living together before marriage. He compared it to divorce. He even compared it to tiny sins. And he said, all of these things are on the cross with Jesus. When you look at, where's my sin? Where's my sin? You can point to the cross and you can say, well, there it is. It's on Christ. He has it. He's taken it from you. And in doing that, I was able to see that these things are just as bad. All of these sins are sins, and all of these things is what brought Jesus to the cross. And he took all of that to the cross for us. And for a pastor to remind somebody of that is huge, because I really did feel like divorce can be up on the cross. And all these other things can be up on the cross. Slander can be up on the cross. But transitioning, how could that be up there? Look at all the destruction I've caused. But my pastor was able to say, it's up there with all those other things. Can't you see it? Like, it's there. And so just recalling those things is huge. And especially, and I mean, that could probably go for anybody who ends up in a pastor's office and says, my sin can't be forgiven. And then he could tell you, well, it is. You don't have any say in it. That's not something you did. So that's always been the first thing with pastors. Also responding with compassion and just understanding. I think it takes a lot of listening, because it's really easy for a transgender person to walk into a pastor's office and say, I don't know if I should do this anymore. And the pastor to say, you shouldn't, out of a deep concern, to rebuke them and say, you shouldn't be doing this. Why are you doing this to yourself? Look at all this destruction. But to be able to listen to what the person's actually feeling, if they're already feeling the full weight of the law on them, like, do you have to double down on it? I'm not a pastor, so I don't know how you would go about it, but they're already feeling the full weight of the law. So what they need probably is the gospel message. Like, you understand that what you've done is wrong. Do you understand that what you've done is also forgiven? So for pastors, I think that's a big one. And to walk into a pastor's office, if you're transgender, think about it. Maybe everyone in your life is LGBT or LGBT approving. No one's listening to why you want to transition, especially if the reason you're wanting to transition brings you face to face with a pastor. They certainly don't want to hear about it. Chances are, unless you have a good therapist who wants to listen to you about the Christian stuff and the detransitioning, the only person you're having a chance to talk to is a pastor. So the pastor should probably just take some time to listen and understand, because maybe the person's not been able to talk about it. Wasn't the case for me. I talked about it with my friends, but I could definitely see that being the case for other people.
What about parents? What would be your advice to parents for how to handle it? Maybe start with an adult child that says, hey, mom, dad, I'm transitioning.
WeHeartNutrition.com is a vitamin and supplement company that provides the highest quality, research-backed ingredients, customized and optimized to help you be healthy. What I also love about We Heart Nutrition is that this is a family-owned company, and they donate a full 10% back of all of their revenue to pregnancy resource centers to help moms and babies in need. So whether you are premenopausal or postmenopausal, whether you're looking to conceive, help improve your fertility, whether you're pregnant, and this is a great prenatal vitamin, or you're postnatal. Plus, I'm very excited to share this with my husband. Now We Heart Nutrition has come out with their first line of men's vitamins. And if you order today at weheartnutrition.com, get your vitamins, you can get 20% off using the code Lila. And if you spend at least $50, you will get a free signature bamboo capsule vitamin box. So go to weheartnutrition.com today. Use the code Lila at checkout to get 20% off your purchase. That's weheartnutrition.com.
What about parents? What would be your advice to parents for how to handle it? Maybe start with an adult child who says, hey, mom, dad, I'm transitioning.
Unfortunately, that's a common one. A lot of parents have come to me with concerns of adult children who say I'm transitioning, and they're going further and further into it, and they're not even keeping the parents updated. In these cases, a lot of times the parents push back on it or are Christians, and the child just wants to cut them completely out of their life. No, parents, I don't want you. You're pushing me away and all this. But in reality, it's the child isolating himself. What I would say to parents in a situation like that is you need to be honest with your child. When it comes down to, do we use the pronouns? Do we use the name just to keep a relationship? You should always keep the door open. Your child should always, any person who you love and care about should always be able to come to you and say, I'm struggling with this, but you shouldn't lie to them. Using preferred pronouns when you know that your son is a man, but he wants to be a woman, calling him she instead of he would be lying to him. If he ever does come to his senses, as parents, you'll want to be the ones who told him the truth. That when he's searching around for who told me the truth, because now I don't know what to do, like where I was, my whole world came crashing down. I was looking for somebody who would tell me the truth. And that's how I found Christians. I had Christian neighbors who I knew I could have gone to. So if parents could be that person, their kid looks around and says, who's been telling me the truth this whole time? They'll go to their parents if it's been the parents. Hopefully. That's what we would pray for, is that they would go to the parents. So in all things, always be truthful, even when it hurts. It's almost like, if I can compare it to somebody with a heroin addiction. If your brother or your child, we'll say your child, is addicted to heroin, you don't want him living homeless on the street. And you invite him into your home, but if he's stealing money from you and there's this toxic relationship, you don't want him doing heroin. He could overdose. But you also, can you keep that in your home? Is that a good spot for him, or are you enabling this behavior? And I think that's a pretty fair analogy, is if you're affirming the hormones, are you even passively enabling this certain behavior that's ruining your child? It's tearing them apart physically because they're having these surgeries and they're losing pieces of themselves. Pieces are being chopped off or stitched on like Frankenstein. And it's tearing them apart mentally. They don't know who they are. They at a very basic level don't know if they're a man or a woman. And they don't understand what it means to be a man or a woman. So I would for parents, just to always be that pillar of truth, especially for adult children, because you think they can kind of come and go and there's a little bit of freedom there.
I think a lot of parents might be afraid that if they dead name or use the not preferred pronouns, they tell the truth, that they will have the door slammed in their face.
They will. Most likely they will. If parents tell their kids the truth and it enrages them, the door is going to slam. The narrative on the trans side is that Christians hate them so much and they kick them out of the family. And that's what they're always going to say. The reality is the trans-identified person kicks himself out of the family because he hates the truth. It enrages him to hear the truth. When you try to share any piece of truth, it doesn't have to be as explicit as Jesus loves you. It can just be, I don't think you're a woman. If it's a man and you say, I don't think you're a woman, that's the truth. That is how he's created. It's going to enrage him, most likely. I hope it doesn't. But the fact of the matter is, it probably will. and he's going to slam that door. But the thing is, he slammed the door. The parents didn't. Their side is still wide open. So if he wants to come back through that door, he has the key for it. And the parents never close that door. They want him to come back. If he knocks, they're going to open the door. Hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Like, are you feeling okay? Do you need a meal or something like that? So if he's the one slamming the door, I guess parents might still feel guilty because then their child is just away from them and you don't know what he's getting into. Maybe he is falling into homelessness. They say that transgender identified people experience homelessness more. I've not looked into the statistics, but at least that's what they say. And if we take that at face value, then I can see why there's a deep concern for parents whose children have just slammed the door on them. But telling the truth is not you slamming the door as a parent. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Do you have any advice for grandparents? Because I know some of the struggles for family members of, adults or children who are identifying as trans, the grandparents express it's particularly painful for them. And this is often when the grandchild is usually a child, they're a minor, and then their parents are supporting transition, but they don't. They know that this isn't right, but they have to somehow manage this family dynamic.
I have heard stories like that. It's very common and it is very heartbreaking. I talk to parents and grandparents. Sometimes I will do a call or a speaking event with just a few, maybe a lot of them, or sometimes one-on-one phone calls and Zoom calls, whatever people want, FaceTime. And I've heard stories from grandparents. They might say, it's my, son's child. And so the daughter-in-law is pushing it, and they might still be married and everything, but she doesn't want to overstep because it's the child's own mother. If this is the grandmother, she doesn't want to overstep the child's own mother. The grandmother says, well, it's her daughter, and so she's a little bit, she's more able to push back on it. Sometimes there's a dynamic with that, with the son or the daughter who's pushing it on the grandchild. Not always, but I have heard that. And then the grandparents also say, if I push back too much, I won't see my grandchild at all. I won't even be able to be that pillar of truth in their life because their parents will just cut me completely off. I've looked into the grandparent thing. I've listened to stories. That one gets me. That one stumps me because with the parents, maybe it's easier to say your children know that they have a certain relationship to you. Be that pillar of truth. Be honest with them. Keep the conversation open. If you use a nickname, you use a nickname, but the pronouns is really a spot that you shouldn't cave on. Even I think names you shouldn't cave on. There are certain names that are male names and certain names that are female names. Sometimes they can be either or, but for the grandparent, you try to be that pillar of truth and you're just shut out entirely. I don't know. If you can have a relationship with the grandchild, keep being that pillar of truth, knowing that possibly in the background, your own child or daughter-in-law or son-in-law might be speaking poorly about you and about how you're transphobic and trying to shape the grandchild's mind into thinking that you actually don't love them or don't support them. The grandparents, I would say, is more case by case just because of that. I've just heard it go so many ways. But with the parents, it's always case by case. There's always different people struggling with different things, but there is a more universal theme that I've noticed in talking to parents with adult children, at least, that they want the door open. They're keeping the door open and they don't want the child to slam the door. And there's just this dynamic where, how do I keep his side open? How do I keep him from slamming the door? And the answer is you can't. With the grandparents, you can try to be that. You could try to always tell the truth to the son or daughter-in-law and not necessarily to the grandchild. But I don't know. I'm still looking into the whole grandparent thing. I'm trying to find answers. I've been watching YouTube videos about grandparents. I've been searching on online forums for adults for grandparent to grandparent. A lot of it is so hard to find. If you go on and you're looking for advice because you have a transgender identified grandchild, a lot of it's positive. It's affirming. I do know that churches have started support groups. They have little run by pastors, usually, not always. There's support groups for for parents and grandparents who are going through it and just don't know what to do. I've done Zoom calls with a couple of them. So for any parents or grandparents, talk to your pastor if you really, truly do not know where to turn.
And you're saying a pastor, though, that is not pro LGBT
Right. You don't want somebody
identity.
who's pro LGBT, because then they might teach you how to affirm it, or they might do cartwheels around certain points in the Bible where they're saying, no, see, actually here you can see a third and a fourth and a fifth gender. And you're like, no, you don't see that because that doesn't exist. So you always want to go to a pastor who's teaching the Bible rightly. He has to be actually teaching the Bible, not trying to do cartwheels around the sacraments or the teachings or in all these sorts of things. You have to go to a real steadfast pastor who's going to tell you exactly how it is.
How did your parents respond to your detransition, Katie, when you told them for the first time that you're no longer Caden, you're Katie?
They were shocked. And because I told them, I said, I'm not going to be transgender anymore. And my mom said to me, she said, I thought you were sure. I thought you did your research. She was clearly very worried about me because I had a double mastectomy and a hysterectomy. And she's thinking, what are you going to do? But I could also see, I think, a little bit of guilt in my parents. They felt guilty. So at every turn, I reassured them I was over 18. I was 18, 19, 20, 24 when I had the hysterectomy. That it was nothing that they did, nothing that they could have changed, because I don't want them to feel guilty about those sorts of things. I've left it in the past. You know, what's forgiven is forgiven, and we can leave it at that. If I were in their shoes that many years ago, I would have done the same thing. I wouldn't have known what to do. If I had had the same upbringing and the same value system and, you know, the same ignorance of the issue and been bombarded with the same media that they were bombarded with, I would have done the same thing. So I'm sure that they feel guilty for letting me go through it. They've mentioned it a few times, but I've not really been able to entertain it. One, because it tears me apart that they feel guilty about that. I just don't like seeing my parents go through that. And also, what's that going to do now? Like, it happened. It's in the past. It's terrible. I wish it hadn't happened, but it did. So there's only one way to move at this point, and we can't go backwards. And that's kind of my take on it. So for my parents and for the people around me, I'm very much positive about it. Like, look how far I've come from that. Let's just leave it in the past. It's over. There's going to come a day, Christ is going to come back, we'll be resurrected in perfect bodies, and I won't have to worry about any of that stuff that's happened. So let's just leave it and build from there. And also learn from it. We can't just pretend it never happened and not learn any lessons from it. But that's been a big thing. I think most people were kind of thinking, uh-oh, we affirmed this. And I was just thinking, it's okay.
What about Grandma? How did she respond to your detransition?
She is very happy that I detransitioned, very happy that I'm back to normal. And she'll actually watch this or listen to this interview. She's been excited for it to come out. I talked to her a lot about it. I actually talked to her a bit about what it's like to be a grandparent going through it, because when people were telling me, what's your advice for grandparents? What's your advice? And grandparents would be on the phone with me. And I said, I'm working on it. I'm really sorry. Ask your pastor. Like, I'll be praying for you. We can talk about all this stuff. I don't know exactly which direction you should take this. I just, in full transparency, I had to tell them, I don't know. This is all new stuff. I called my grandmother, and I think that as a good grandmother, she might still be protecting me from some of the emotions that she felt going through the whole thing. Because she opened up about some stuff, and it was sad to hear what I put her through. But I think that there's other stuff that she's not told me. And maybe she shouldn't. Maybe that is something that she'll bear with her friends and not put on me.
She did have the ladies praying for you, though.
She did.
And it's you mentioned baptism. The
Yes.
grace of your baptism. You were baptized as a baby, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And you were in a Catholic home, but then they weren't practicing later, the
Right.
parents.
Exactly.
So you had the grace of baptism, and that it held you back from wanting to die because you knew, like, I'm a child of God. You're describing that. So incredible. And then you had these ladies that you didn't even know who were praying for you the
Yep.
whole time.
And probably a lot more than that, just in general, because I will pray a lot for transgender identified people in general, some specific, if I meet somebody or people come up to me and they say, pray for my sister or my brother, they'll often tell me a name. So in my prayers, it's a very specific one. But sometimes I just pray in general for these big issues, transgenderism or any sort of confusion like that, any sort of sexual confusion, abortion, like these big issues that people struggle with, the people who have gone through it, the families of people who have gone through it. So I can't even imagine how many people were praying for me, maybe not so specifically, but they were praying.
Do you think prayer is what made you look in the mirror that one day and say, suddenly, where's Katie?
There was prayer. There was the word of God that I was hearing because I was listening to the Bible podcast. And I think, so yeah, I would say it was a lot of prayer. It was a lot of hearing the word. But what initially made me look in the mirror, I think, was a combination of hearing the word of God and prayer.